Well, we hear a lot these days about automated provisioning and NaaS and things like that. How long does it really take to get a quote for DIA service? Or more to the point, how long does it actually take to get a circuit installed? And what do enterprises really think about their ISPs? Well, welcome to TeleGeography Explains the Internet, the show that explores the business behind all of the ways humans stay connected around the world. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and my guest today is Dennis Thankachan. He's the CEO and co-founder of Lightyear. He's going to address these questions and more based on customer experience in their telecom operating system platform. Dennis joined me for his third time as a guest on the show to discuss the findings from Lightyear's Enterprise ISP Experience Guide and give us a live look at what's going on in the ISP market. We break down the surprisingly fast quote-to-receipt speed for DIA and how international quoting compares to the US. We look at the significant price delta between DIA and business broadband. We dive into the ongoing problem of quote accuracy and how automation and data quality impact whether a quote is actionable. We uncover the median install time for a DIA circuit and discuss factors like construction and site readiness that can push those installation times way out. Finally, Dennis shares what the data reveal about customer satisfaction, highlighting that while install time matters, the quality of communication can really be the biggest factor. If you enjoy the show, please take a moment to rate, subscribe, and tell a friend to listen. As always, you can find me on LinkedIn and feel free to send me suggestions and feedback there. Now, please enjoy the interview. Welcome back to the show, Dennis.
Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, of course. In fact, you were on actually earlier this year, and then I think this is your third time on the show. So we've got a bit of a background. Folks should definitely go back and listen to those if they want to know more about your whole journey into founding Lightyear. But for people tuning in for the purposes of this episode, could you just give us a quick rundown of what you do as the CEO of Lightyear, what you guys are up to there?
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me back on, and clearly you can't keep me away.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, I love to hop on this show because like TeleGeography, we share a commitment to basically shining a light in the darkness that is the business telecom ecosystem, just from a different angle than TeleGeography. Once again, as Greg noted, my name is Dennis. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Lightyear. Lightyear, it creates software that we call the telecom operating system that we sell to large enterprises that helps them automate each component of their telecom lifecycle. So that means things like quoting, contracting, managing your installs, tracking your network inventory, paying bills, auditing invoices, changing services, et cetera, and the like are all automated for your internet connectivity, your WAN connectivity, colo space, voice services, et cetera, in a vendor-neutral format. And we work with thousands of vendors spanning the globe, and we currently work with over 400 enterprises. And why chatting with TeleGeography is of interest is because we collect data like them, just from a slightly different angle, because in the context of all the work we do for enterprises, we see live what's going on in the market across a variety of vectors, and that's part of what we're excited to chat about here today.
Yeah, exactly. So specifically, our topic is the state of the ISP market, as you call it. I saw you present these data at ONUG in New York City a few weeks ago from this recording, and I think I said to you then, like, oh, of all the things at that conference, like this is the one that I was like the most like, oh, I am well familiar with this area. I'm totally tracking with you. So I think that made me think, hey, we should absolutely talk about this. It's very related to my day to day, specifically at TeleGeography. Even among my colleagues. So before we dive into the report, you're going to be talking about the state of the ISP market. I want to first say, of course, I always have to ask about geography. Like, what specific geographies are we talking about this data analysis coming from?
So we do global. However, our data is biased in the sense that the majority of our data exists for North America, primarily
Hmm.
US and Canada in particular. But we have now sourced connectivity in over 50 countries. And I will say that there is more in common than not in common,
Hmm.
US versus international. I'll try my best to also call out the nuances. Our international data is statistically significant, particularly in a few sort of larger
Right.
markets like India, as an example.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And certainly, yeah, there are trends about ISPs that are the same everywhere. There are some that are very different. I think that's always interesting to sort of see how that plays out in the data. And then also, like, what scale of enterprise are your customers that are feeding these data?
So the vast majority of our customer base is mid-market and large
Hmm.
enterprise.
Hmm.
And mid-market will span, call it like 25 to 100 business facilities, maybe
Hmm.
call it sub $1 billion in revenue. But in terms of large enterprise, we work with companies in the Fortune 100 and even a few in the Fortune 10.
Hmm.
And so we see the entire gamut of the market. Some example customers that I can name that we work with include uh, Palo Alto Networks, Motorola Solutions, Five Guys, Starwood, Okta, and a large slew of customers that you probably wouldn't have heard of that are
Hmm.
sizable, as
Hmm.
well as a
Yeah.
good number of customers that I can't name that are in that size range or a bit larger.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. It's funny, as a just a little aside, I do a market size model for telegeography, and I had an intern once just like pour over like economic papers and government things. There's like very little objective definitions of the segments of the enterprise market. Like, when are you mid market, when are you enterprise? Like the most objective, of course, are putting it onto indices and things like that. But if you're basing it on things that like I care about, like number of employees, number of sites. You would think economists would have that more worked out than they do. I find that very frustrating. All right, and then just one more question to set things up before we get into the substance of your findings from the report. But um, are we looking at customers that are like going into your platform to like source a WAN per se, or this is like when they're like, hey, I need to get connectivity at these offices in this region or something like that? Like, take us a little bit through like how they are actually engaging with the platform.
So there's everything in between what you
Hmm.
noted. Our objective is to be the sort of like single telecom pane of glass for an enterprise. And for our best and most productive customers, they use us to, over time, source their entire WAN. Could be all at once, could be piece by piece by piece by piece. But we've had a good number of customers get there. Um, Unless they're doing an entire network transformation, however, as you're well aware, sourcing an
Yeah.
entire WAN at once or changing your entire WAN is, man, that is a pain and tough project.
Yeah,
So unless they're
absolutely.
undergoing a
Uh,
particular network transformation, we typically piece our way there, whether it be
mhm.
through segments, through individual needs, or ongoing network change out. So we see everything in between.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
when we're
yeah.
successful, they over time use us to source their entire network.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Exactly as you say, so many win managers like ultimately sourcing is a long term, never ending job anyway, with M&A and offices opening and closing and all kinds of things like that, right? So that's like taking some of the complexity out of that is no doubt what they're after, right? So yeah. Excellent. All right, so Dennis, let's get into the meat of the report. This is what I saw you present on at the ONA conference. But we'll start out with quote speed. So, like, someone goes to your platform, I assume they say, "Hey, this is what I need," and then tick, tick, tick. When do I find out how much it's going to cost me? What did you find there?
Sure. So, once again, via the Lightyear platform, we process thousands and thousands of telecom service quotes monthly, and we have charts in our enterprise ISP um, experience guide report that showcase what I'm talking about here. But basically, to set a baseline, most US dedicated internet circuit quotes are received within 1 day from basically RFP submission to carrier. Meaning, so
Hmm.
like you submit an RFP to a carrier, 1 day you have some sort of an initial service quote back to you. That's the median data we see,
Right.
and the on the 90th percentile we see about 5 days.
Hmm.
Uh, Broadband circuits are often returned in less than a day. We call it
Mm.
like about half a day for the median. And in some cases, they're instant responses. The 90th percentile is about 1 day for broadband. And, when you talk about the median and the 90th percentile, there are a variety of variables that can impact quote pricing time, or I guess
Right.
time to quote receipt is the variable we're looking at here in days. Um, there are uh, larger carriers that can quote on net services or services that don't require construction basically instantly.
Right.
And
Right.
that's where basically after just a quick quality check, you can return a quote to a customer um, very, very quickly.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I
that's
was
the
surprised
lowest.
at honestly how low the numbers were. It's great. I think that the industry has been working towards that. Certainly back in the day, very often quotes took even just quote, not provisioning a circuit, right? So still took days. So it's good to hear that things are happening pretty rapidly like that.
Yeah, and there are a few nuances to call out there. For one, just because you can get one quote back from one carrier doesn't
Mm,
mean you can return quotes back to the customer.
mm-hmm.
From our perspective, we don't want you to see one quote from one carrier. That's probably what that individual carrier wants, but we want you to have an exhaustive set of quotes. So typically, you have to think about the on net sort of like long pole in the tent, especially if there is a carrier that's best fit to service a particular need.
Right.
Meaning,
Right.
there are certain carriers that are larger carriers in particular that can return on net quotes instantly. There are certain carriers that, even if theoretically on net may require a site survey or evaluation of the infrastructure, that can take several days.
Mm-hmm.
The other
Mm-hmm.
thing is, there are certain sites where no one is on net. Everyone requires some form of construction,
Right.
in which case it is more likely that carriers require some form of site survey or evaluation, which may take several days. So basically, if you're
Mm-hmm.
talking US quoting, 90th percentile, what we have is 5 days. Median is 1 day. That's oftentimes what happens. Broadband is most of the time instant because it's pretty rare that we're quoting off net broadband, basically. So
Mm-hmm.
most of the time it's insta quoting. To call out international, internationally, a lot of carriers do not use automated systems or portals to quote, and their quoting systems overall may be a bit behind the US counterparts just from like a speed perspective. So we see a median of about 4 days and then a 90th percentile of about 12 days
Okay.
internationally.
Yeah.
Um, and then when you're talking about aggregation, we basically see a day and a half. So basically, like day and a half doesn't sound like very long, but it's still 50% higher than the USDIA median,
Right. Right.
and a slightly higher 6 day 90th percentile. With international quoting, or sorry, with aggregated quoting, they are quoting another carrier. So basically, you're requesting a
Mm-hmm.
quote from them, they're requesting a
Mm-hmm.
quote from another carrier. That tends to add to timelines. Um,
Right. Right.
and then finally, when we talk about two-sided WAN circuits like an Ethernet private line, a wave circuit, a point-to-point, um, that's where we see basically a median and 90th percentile that's about double what you see with a DIA. So 2 day median, 12-day 90th percentile. And that's effectively because they're quoting two ends of a circuit,
Mm-hmm.
and often one end of that circuit may be aggregated.
So yeah, so there you're saying like, if I'm getting a DI quote, it's relatively simple. I need to have access to that customer site. I have a pop, nearby. On the point-to-point one, you might be there's sort of three circuits involved, right? There's your access on one end, your long haul circuit, and then your Z end access on the other side. So that's just inherently going to and involve maybe more providers and take more time, right?
Correct. That's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah.
right.
And then I just had so one more quote on this. I mean, this sort of belongs to a lot of these different categories, or one more question rather about this. What are you seeing in terms of like typical DIA contract terms? So back in the WAN days where sort of carriers might have gone or a customer might have gone to a carrier and say, hey, and here's like all these sites or whatever. 3-year terms used to be kind of common. Are you seeing shorter terms when they're able to sort of do this faster sort of provisioning process?
So 3-year term is still like sort of market standard. We
Right,
are
right.
more
Okay.
frequently seeing 1 to 2 year terms
Hmm.
and more competitive pricing than before on 1 to 2 year
Hmm.
terms. But still, 3-year pricing is market standard. With construction, sometimes they won't even do less than a 3-year term. And we generally see a 1-year term resulting in a 10 to 20% price premium relative to a 3-year term.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Very interesting. Yeah. All right. So since you brought up prices, let's move on to what you found in the report in circuit prices. So first maybe like DIA versus broadband. We know there's a delta between DIA and broadband. What kind of delta are you seeing?
So a 100 meg DIA, the median price point we see is about $500 a
Hmm.
month, which is about $5 a meg.
Right.
And median broadband 100 meg is about $140 a month, so $1.40
Mm-hmm.
per meg. Granted, when I'm talking about DIA, it's sort of a standard product. It's like a
Yeah.
dedicated, symmetric internet delivered over fiber to your suite. Whereas with broadband, what I'm talking about is non-standard. That may be symmetric
Right.
best effort service over fiber. It may be a 100 meg coax circuit with asymmetric upload and download. So it is a very non-standard product, but about $140 is generally what we see
Mhm.
there.
And
And
contention possibly as well, which is another key difference with DIA, right? So your service might be contended based on the time of day and things like that. So yeah.
yeah, 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 and there are all sorts of things, but basically, it's like
Hmm.
the broadband as advertised is effectively best effort or up to, like you will get up to a bandwidth, and yeah, during peak times and things like that, you'll likely see some service attenuation, whereas with DIA you won't. But yeah, it is like I guess a 70% price drop going from
Hmm.
DIA to broadband.
No, yeah, yeah, that is fascinating, certainly, and all of us know at home, if you have a broadband subscription, right, and if you do a speed test or whatever, it's very rarely what you've contracted for. Whereas in DIA, you are definitely getting exactly what you've contracted for most of the time,
Yep.
right? So yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, and then unless you have something else on pricing, I think that's pretty straightforward. Quote accuracy, I was really interested in that this is where all of the work that the industry has been doing over the last several years on getting their inventory systematized, they can maybe share APIs with other providers and all of that, right? All of that still relies on something very human, which is that have we put the right data in the system? Do we know exactly where our circuits are? If we're saying you're near net or on net or whatever, how accurate is that? What are you finding in terms of when they come back to the customer with a quote, how accurate that quote is?
Yeah, so this is an ages old problem that still persists. And the interesting thing is the more that carriers have done to systematize their quoting uh,
Hmm.
and automate their quoting, quotes are faster, but speed and accuracy are not necessarily correlated. They're not
That, that,
inversely
that, that,
correlated.
that that makes sense, right? So it's the old saying, you can have fast, good, or cheap, but pick two out of the three, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And
yeah,
so I'm not going to go so far as to say that they're inversely correlated, meaning the faster
right,
the quote,
right.
the more likely inaccurate, but they're definitely not correlated. And
Hmm.
it is that there are components of automated systems that are, return false positives or false negatives. That's the most painful inaccurate. Basically, you get a quote where the carrier actually can't service, and then you end
Right.
up signing an order that is not able to be fulfilled, and then you're set back quite a bit. Or uh, they don't quote where they can service. That's a huge,
Interesting.
huge pain,
Yeah,
especially when a
yeah,
carrier is on net and you end up picking an off net vendor
right.
undergoing construction, paying a higher price, and there's actually a vendor that's on net there.
I,
That's the thing that we
yeah,
see. So we do
yeah,
everything we can to try and fix these problems because yes, getting a quote back fast is absolutely useless if the quote isn't actionable and accurate. So a
right.
few components of what drives quote issues. Some are hard to avoid. Some you're not able to avoid. Uh, for one, the ultimate problem is an indexing of carrier infrastructure. That's the problem.
Hmm.
You need to
Hmm.
know where the physical infrastructure lies, and carriers have varying degrees of quality records. And then second, Um, Carrier systems may not always match or be up to date with regard to their records of their own infrastructure, and there are a variety of
Hmm.
reasons why that can
Hmm.
be the case. And then finally, also carriers that are frequently acquisitive, like they buy other networks or companies, or they just build new network frequently, may not have their systems up to date for recent changes in that network, acquisitions, divestitures, built. So all of this basically denotes that you may get more likely to get false positives or false negatives based on changes in network, where an automated system may not return the result that's desirable for the carrier. And that's a thing that we see more commonly with automated systems, where a site survey is not required or a few cross checks are not required.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
those are hard, but one thing that we try to do at Lightyear to do this is, for some of the bigger carriers that use automated systems, we sometimes check multiple systems to
Hmm.
validate that they're, for example, if one system says a carrier has infrastructure and other system says it doesn't, and the carrier returns a no bid, we'll try to double check and see if they actually do have infrastructure there, do things like
Right.
that. But this is the hardest one because, it's ultimately up to what the carrier knows.
Right.
Um, other issues can occur. One, if you're using aggregation, you're quoting from a carrier who's quoting from another carrier, and
Hmm.
aggregators sometimes use their own automated systems on top of carrier systems, which
I see.
increase vector for error. So when
Right.
aggregators are quoting underlying carriers, we'll actually double check with underlying carrier systems to validate
Hmm.
accuracy, because sometimes they will quote incorrectly. That can happen. um,
Yeah, and there's like refresh cycles even here that probably come into play as well, right? So the aggregator may be going on data that they've collected in a certain time period, and the carrier has a more recent update or something like that, right? So.
yes, exactly. And then they're just straight up mistakes.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Yeah.
one is carrier mistake, meaning you want to get a 10 gig committed rate, and they quote a 10 gig burstable circuit or a 10
Ooh.
gig port, or
Hmm.
something or other, and they quote something different, and they actually can't provide the service that you intend to purchase for
Right.
whatever reason. And then you end up signing a contract for something that's inaccurate, and that's a problem. The other thing is customer side issues.
Hmm.
Customers make mistakes too. They put in the wrong address, an incomplete address. They
Hmm.
need to the suite, and they get a service that's to the EMPO. They don't include static IPs. They misunderstand a port for a commit. So those types of things happen frequently, and this is where basically just being squeaky clean, we'll use sometimes like AI to read what's returned back from carriers and sort of validate quality, and also to cross check that a customer's request is accurate and try to catch issues before they occur. That happens quite a bit too.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. It's like good application of AI where there's like an objective, like does this match this field from this different data set there, because this is all so complex. And I really just want to say I find interesting this problem around, again, the way that the whole industry is progressing. That there was a technological problem to solve, like how do we get our APIs to talk to each other, and how do we create these automated systems, and a lot of folks like you guys have made some really cool strides on this, and created like awesome tools. In the end, we still have to feed good data into those, and I think that's going to be a big challenge for the carriers over the coming years.
That's right. That's right. And over time for us in particular, like we're brick by brick trying to build up where infrastructure
Hmm.
lies, particularly in areas where it gets quoted frequently. But yeah, it's going to take years to build that up to
Yeah.
the fidelity we'd like.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, you also talked about the installation experience, right? So take us through that. Sort of what your findings were. I'm particularly interested in this like sort of idea of like on net, near net, and off net, because first of all, how a carrier might define that, I think would often be different, right? And secondly, as a customer, sort of working through that and what the implications are, like so crucial, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, let's just set the stage on the numbers, and then talk about the
Mm-hmm.
determinants of the numbers.
Yeah.
So um, installs are frequently cited as the worst part of a WAN manager's experience,
Absolutely.
because
Yeah.
typically you have a project to go live, and you have all eyes on you for the circuit to get delivered, and components of the circuit delivery are just not in your control, and they
Right.
frequently go wrong. Um, and particularly like for dedicated circuits, for dedicated internet circuits, our data says that the median time to install is about 85 days, so a little less than 3 months. The
Mhm.
10th percentile is about 21 days, so you can get a circuit installed in less than a month. And the 90th percentile is 227 days.
That's
So
you got to feel bad for the. I mean, you're talking about probably in that case like digging trenches or hanging
that's right.
wires and stuff like that, of course. But it's still painful to hear, right? Yeah.
That's exactly right. And then, on broadband, the median is less than 30 days, so you less
Hmm.
than a month. And the 10th percentile is about 7 days, so kind of like getting home broadband installed. And
Right.
then the 90th percentile is 107 days. And so, I'll get into why these data points are. So for one, um, DIA has many more steps than broadband because
Hmm.
you are installing a dedicated service where even if it is an install that requires no construction, there are still steps around provisioning and the installation that do require effort from the carrier,
Hmm.
whereas broadband can be a bit closer to flipping a switch from an
Right.
overall install perspective. And when you look at the 10th percentile that of that like less than 30-day DIA experience, most likely that is going to be in the easiest on net scenarios where there's
Hmm.
basically already connectivity to the suite with adequate bandwidth provision, or a data center where that is basically going to be the case. You'll have connectivity at the data
Yeah.
center, um, and you'll already have adequate bandwidth provision. The median circuit install takes some amount of construction, um, and maybe some provisioning work. Uh, the 90th percentile is sort of what you talked about. This is what you call a true off net experience.
Hmm.
Um, this is where you need to actually basically dig trenches, perhaps run aerial fiber, perhaps maybe you have to go through permitting, maybe you have to do something gnarly like splicing and such to get
Hmm.
fiber to the site. And components of that may not even be in the carrier's control. Like if you're getting permits approved by
Right.
the city or state, for example. The other thing that can really hold up installs is a lack of site readiness. So this is not
Mm-hmm.
within the provider's control, but a lot of
Like
the
the
time when there's
customer often. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
for them to finish out an installation, you have to have basically a safe telecom area with power provision. So for the equipment to be able to work, and if you don't have power to the site and it's a new build, that can hold up an install sometimes for months,
Hmm.
which we see at times frequently. On the broadband end, it is much closer to a home install experience, and it is rare that off-net broadband is installed. Like that 107 days, those
Right.
that factors in the rare occasions where a provider is willing to undergo some form of construction to deliver broadband. That may occur when a provider is maybe getting access to a building where they can sell a bunch of other units
Hmm.
because the
Hmm.
broadband economics on their own just don't support construction.
Yeah, yeah, great point, right? So a provider's willing to extend DIA service to you because there's a better price point for them, right? And broadband just like is at price points where you really have to you're looking for providers based on who has already popped your building, more or less, right? So yeah.
That's right. And also the other factor is DIA, you're most likely getting a 3-year term where you can
Mm,
amortize the cost,
right.
whereas broadband, you may be getting month to month or a 1-year term.
Hmm. And obviously, as you said before, there's a price impact here on whether something's sort of on near or off net. Where do you see specifically in the pricing? So is it your experience that if you have greenfield development, you're going to see that in like maybe a big NRC, or do you see them sometimes amortize it over the 3-year term of say a DIA port in the MRC? Or
So
I assume you have some insight in
yeah,
the
so
platform to
we
that. Yeah.
see both. Most
Hmm.
often, we see it amortized in the MRC or monthly recurring cost.
Hmm.
Basically, they'll take, especially if you're getting a 3-year term, and especially if you're willing to go longer than 3 years, which we occasionally see
Right.
making construction deals get done. Um, they will take the excess cost they're paying for construction and then basically amortize it over the 36 months into your cost. So,
Hmm.
going back to the average data set, our median price point for a 100 meg is $503 on a 36-month term, and our 90th percentile is $663.
Gotcha.
So you can
Right.
see a real impact there. Also, when you go to a 10 gig, it's $2,500 median. It's a 3664 90th percentile. So you can really see
Hmm.
that the biggest variable that's impacting that 90th percentile is going to be construction cost amortization.
Hmm.
However, we do have certain customers that are on occasion more able to stomach a one-time capex, and some providers are
Hmm.
willing to just allow you to pay a one-time like ten
Right.
thousand
Put that
dollar,
in
five
a
thousand dollar
big
fee.
big NRC, and then just have like, yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. And
Yep.
of course, there's obviously still geographic impact here too, right? So greenfield development in like, suburban New York metro, or even outside like Tulsa, Oklahoma or something is very different than if I have like greenfield development to a factory that's 10 miles down the road, right? There's always like essentially a cost per mile for all of this stuff, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. And that's where, where sometimes people get this wrong is people will benchmark geographies like they're different,
Hmm.
rather than underlie. The thing is, it's not that specific location that impacts the price, like
Hmm.
New York versus Tulsa. It's going to be the variable number one, the most impactful variable is there infrastructure available and construction required? Like within Tulsa, Oklahoma, there's going to be dramatically different price points depending on where you're getting fiber. And then two, it's going to be if there is construction or site specific work required, what about this area impacts that price or pace?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
some places you do need to get particular permits to do specific things that may impact the price of the service.
Yeah.
In some places, labor is more or less expensive than others that may impact the price.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's really interesting. That it becomes so complex because there's so many different factors. I would say also certainly one that I think impacts pricing even within the U.S. And I should say, obviously, the things you're saying largely do apply within the U.S. There are differences in different countries depending on the situations, but the sort of pop landscape impacts it too, right? In other words, there's always going to be a lot more providers that are on or near net if you're on, say, if you're in a major metro, especially on the coast or something. Whereas if there's a less competitive environment, I think you would still often see higher prices just because they can, right? You know what I mean?
That
So
is right. That is right.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about like sort of why the installation process can vary. Um, I'm curious to get your take on a sort of like a little bit outside the report, just on the we've touched on this already, but kind of like the readiness of the industry to do like end to end NaaS. With all of these difficulties, right? In other words, what I've always been working through with the promise of NaaS is that there are situations where absolutely there's, like you said, you're in a data center, there's already the bandwidth there that's over provisioned, and you can just tap into it. I see it very much as we're always going to have a world where there are days or weeks, or sometimes more provisioning time. There's just no getting around that for now. Maybe there's some possibilities with Leo or whatever, but yeah, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think this is the newfangled acronym of hype that carriers want to make into a product. We see a variety of NaaS offerings, and in certain circumstances, we see customers buy NaaS products. Um, we don't see broad adoption of NaaS
Hmm.
for a
I
few
agreed.
reasons,
Likewise, yeah. Hmm.
and basically the reasons are just um, I guess, laws of nature. So, for one, to your point, like you can say you want to deliver something as a service, and calling it as a service sounds really nice, but software as a service works because you can basically cloud host something and get someone something instantly
Immediately,
delivered.
right?
That is a service so long as you have the pipe available and you don't have to host it centrally. That makes a ton of sense. For infrastructure pipes, you can't just magically snap a finger and make the pipe appear. And there are very limited benefits to centralization that
Right.
occur with infrastructure build because you still have to get a local pipe there, unless it is something like LEO or something like that,
Mm.
which by the way is not terming itself as network as a service. But
Right. Right.
that's a whole thing. That's a whole another thing.
Well, even in the satellite or 5G scenario, you still have a truck roll or a shipping logistics kind of thing to get a box and plug that box in, even if it's plug and play, right? There's still some process that has to be undergone. It's still infrastructure, right?
Yeah,
So yeah,
and on the other end, like theoretically, everyone would use that if it all worked well. And like Starlink is like very exciting in terms of what it can do, but they're just laws of
right.
physics in terms of the
Yeah,
quality of
yeah.
service
There's
that it
only
can
so much
deliver.
spectrum for one thing. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
for network as a service, for one, you still have to go through an install. So it works better in places that and where they're primarily selling these products are areas that are already on net
Right, right.
and they can provision connectivity quickly. Granted,
Hmm.
those are the areas where the install problem is just not so great. The other thing is because they're either aggregating wholesale circuits that are on net or selling you service with a degree of flexibility afforded to it, like on demand
Hmm.
connectivity. Generally, you're seeing these products priced at quite a premium.
Right, right,
Um,
right. Yeah, absolutely. Because
I can't
it's
speak in
being
aggregate, but it's more expensive.
underutilized at part of the time, right? And so you have to price that in to have the infrastructure in place and not be guaranteed revenue on it, right? So
Yeah, so generally, like what we see is if you need network at a place, the other thing is like people don't often end up at a place temporarily, like a
mm-hmm, hmm.
physical location.
Right, right.
So if that's the case, like you are better off just getting the best network option for yourself and signing up for that for as long as you need to be there.
Hmm.
So there are particular use cases in particular instances where, like, oh, for this data center that we're standing up, we need this amount of bandwidth
Right.
for this period of time and this amount of bandwidth for this period of time. And maybe there is a case for NaaS. There are also other ways to accomplish that. Um, but generally we don't see broad adoption of this
Yeah,
service today.
yeah. No, I always like to talk about this. That's been my take for quite some time. There are, like you say, there are some use cases, but as a broad kind of end to end thing, I just never really see that materializing. Again, fabrics between data centers, that's all well and good, but I just thought, particularly when we're thinking about the installation experience, it's always good to remind people, as I often say, whenever there's a cloud on whatever diagram some provider is showing you, that's the part they don't want to talk about. Always within that cloud is physical infrastructure, right? And so when you're faced with the reality of like, hey, we have to build physical infrastructure, there's just no getting around that, right? All right.
Yep, that is right.
All right, so a couple more things from the report that I wanted to hit were customer satisfaction. I found this section really fascinating. What did you find there?
Yeah, so we um, track customer satisfaction via NPS surveys
Hmm.
on all the installs that we process, and we're beginning to do this now for quoting as well. And our objective is to basically reverse engineer the best experience and
Hmm.
reverse engineer avoidance of the bad experiences. And sometimes things are obvious, sometimes they're not. Um, the one cool thing is, one, we have a thesis that working with Lightyear makes the experience better for a customer. We were able to observe that in the data. So the
Hmm.
NPS on Lightyear in particular was an average of a 4.64 out of 5, whereas NPS on carriers was an average of a 4.16 out of 5. The other thing is the 4.16 carrier NPS, I think, is higher than it would have been had Lightyear not been present.
I was going to say, I mean, so, as someone who talks to a fair number of network managers, like I thought that was the carrier should be pretty pleased with that result, right? So,
Yeah, and
yeah,
that's something
yeah,
that we like to share with our carrier partners to tell them like,
yeah.
hey, maybe sometimes you may feel like we're disintermediating you, which is
Hmm.
absolutely not the intention. Like our carrier partners need to be happy. Our goal is
Right,
to make you look your best in front of the
right,
customer and
right.
get a happy retained customer because that's what makes us look good too. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
the other things are, there are a few obvious things that impact carrier NPS, and one is install time. So longer
Hmm.
installs result in lower NPS, higher, shorter installs result in higher NPS. Like less than 60 days is an average of 4.44. Greater
Right.
than 120 days is 3.83.
Hmm.
However, the biggest data impact is quality of communication. That's the
Mm.
biggest
Hmm.
qualitative.
Hmm.
So basically, time aside, if carriers are uncommunicative or make next steps unclear to customers, even in fast installs, you get very poor NPS,
Interesting.
because oftentimes you end up in a situation, even with a fast and easy install, that a customer doesn't know what to do, ends up confused, and has like a major point of frustration, like a
Right.
circumstance where, oh, a tech showed up and nobody knew that the tech was going to show up, so we have to delay the install,
Hmm.
and or the carrier makes an error or just makes things unclear to the customer. Granted, on
Right.
the other end, if an install progresses and hits delays, but the carrier communicates well, is proactive, and handles the delays with proactivity, then you can actually see a 5-star NPS on those
Hmm.
lengthy installs. So
Hmm.
that's the biggest thing that carriers can do. And, you know, circumstances where basically we try to broaden the communication between carrier and customer via how we drive the experience based on what we
Mm.
see here. The other thing is, if you hit an install error, just a straight up botched install, oftentimes that's almost always a one. So,
Right. Of
as
course.
you
Yeah.
probably
That's a,
imagine. So,
yeah.
so that
Yeah.
is that
Even
stuff
if
we
it
try to
was
avoid.
customer error, it's probably still frustrating, right? So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense because in this real physical world that we have to lay fiber into or not, there are things that are going to be outside of a carrier's control often, right? But the key is, does the customer understand what's happening and why, right? So that's fascinating to hear. Yeah.
Exactly right.
All right, so Dennis, last section that I want to hit of the report here is your lifecycle management section, and I find it really interesting, like this idea of like, hey, when you're building a tool like this, it's not just can I make an order, can I get a quote, but like the lifecycle management of your services. So first, I want to say, inevitably, in a term like this, how are you at Lightyear defining lifecycle management?
So yeah, we consider this effectively everything that goes on with the circuit, from the service being up to the eventual deprecation of the
Hmm.
service via disconnect. So that's going to mean um, dealing with outages and issues and repairs as they may occur. This means service changes, like moving a service, upgrading, downgrading, making a service change of other type, disconnecting the service, um, billing management, billing issues, invoice auditing, and then renewals, renegotiations of the circuit over time.
That's a great definition. It's, I think, very clear. Sort of just all of the things that could happen with your circuit over your life of ownership. What specific role is Lightyear sort of playing in that process? Can they go into the platform and sort of check on these things? Can they look at like SLAs, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we are a full lifecycle manager, and today we play in the vast majority of those pieces, and eventually we'll power all of it.
Hmm.
So, for one, we're an inventory of your services first and foremost. Like, a lot of the issues occur because customers don't know what they have in their network. When you have an outage, you need to know who to call, your circuit ID, and and if you don't have those details in front of you, you're not going to be able to deal with the outage.
Right.
Will index over 30 unique data points for all your services, give you the support numbers, the circuit configurations, the circuit IDs, etc. So you can deal with repairs, outages, etc. And also, like, basically notate things like your device configuration, whatever, like all in one place
Hmm.
that may be relevant. And with that, today we don't do repair ticketing, but
Mm-hmm.
we make it much easier for you, and we will move toward repair ticketing and network monitoring in the near future. The
Right. So in other
second
words, they
piece.
would still have to open a ticket with their provider, but they would be able to use like your software to like get their circuit ID and that kind of information.
Exactly right. And
Gotcha.
then, there are certain types of tickets you can use Lightyear
Hmm.
for.
Hmm.
If you want to move, change, upgrade, downgrade, or disconnect a circuit, those are actually like somewhat painful process to go through. Those are
Hmm.
things that we help with and sort of have process. So you can disconnect a circuit with a click rather than a phone call, and we'll warn you about things like ETFs or contract terms if they hinder that for you. With renewals, we will handle renewal processing for you if you'd like to renegotiate, you'd like to reshop a service, and we'll make
Hmm.
sure you never miss a renewal deadline
Hmm.
via that inventory system. And bill payment, we'll do invoice digitization, invoice auditing, and we can also do bill payment and billing disputes for you as
Got it.
well.
Hmm. And what about like SLA credits, things like that?
So SLAs, we'll track all of your SLAs per service. And in circumstances where we process your billing and an SLA credit is expected, we can see through it that we get those for you.
Gotcha. hmm Yeah. So that when I was reading about that and thinking through this, I was kind of thinking, oh, sort of the original idea here is like, hey, we want to have this like ability to get a sort of an automated quote and provisioning sort of system. But it also sounds to me like you're ultimately going to be a TEM as well as that. Is that how you sort of see the long term vision?
Yeah, so we are like, the goal is to fix business telecom and deliver enterprises the outcomes that you would desire from telecom
hmm
via a system.
Right.
That's it. So in the context of that, one, I have no arrogance about like what that needs to be, but I do know that the outcomes we need to deliver. It is fair to say that yeah, like we can handle the circuit acquisition piece. That's where we're really differentiated, and TEMS already
Right.
exist. The
hmm
the We do need to be a TEM because solving the circuit acquisition piece without the expense management piece is not a holistic solution.
Right.
And one, there's no great circuit acquisition solution in market outside Lightyear.
hmm
And two, the TEMs are very expensive today. They're very clunky. They're not very good at what they do. And they only do the expense management piece. They don't solve
Right.
circuit acquisition in particular. So I think having those hand in hand is of particular importance.
Yeah, I mean it makes sense from a sort of data standpoint, right? It's like you're building the same data set that you would need to have these different functions. So that yeah, I think that's a really interesting vision. All right, so Dennis, we're nearing the end here, but I just wanted to. I always like to get like a little bigger picture, towards the end, and I just want to get your take on how you see the industry as a whole, right? You've made some really cool progress in this, but how do you see the industry progressing towards this like long term vision of automating the whole life cycle of telecom circuits? Uh, Both within the US, maybe a different picture, or within Western Europe, and versus the entire world, like you sort of mentioned at the top of the show.
On a positive note, I think competition benefits the industry, and the
hmm
ISP business is getting more competitive than ever.
hmm
There are just more carriers propping up every single day, and the business gets more competitive, and that benefits the customer. The other
Yeah.
thing is customers are pretty strong-willed and expecting a certain type of service
mm
quality from their business vendors today, and that's permeating into the ISP space, which has been really slow moving, where carriers are now more open to automations, APIs, digitization initiatives, and that's great because that benefits the customer and that benefits our mission here. On the other end, it's worth noting that um, carriers are embracing of this stuff, but in a themselves first way, of
Of
course,
course. Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
they're open to building a portal for themselves, a software service for themselves to expose their data to their
hmm
customers, but they won't standardize things. They won't make things easy. They want you to only use them and will obfuscate anything that would impact you not using them. Because of course it's in their incentive to do so. So I can't necessarily blame them for that. But so all of that stuff makes stuff easier. But I think expecting carriers to get behind some form of standardization or things like that, I just think that's not going to happen. But that's the role that we play in the market. If that were something that you could expect, I wouldn't think that Lightyear has a particularly exciting role.
Right. Right. Exactly. So your place is to say like, hey, you don't need your carrier to have sort of APIs in place with every other carrier because they can meet in this like neutralized two sided platform, if you will.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yeah, I mean, of course, the carriers have different incentives depending on their scale and what kind of sales teams they have and that sort of thing. But I think even in a sort of like, hey, let's build an ecosystem way, which some of them are working towards or whatnot. It's just also like a lot of work, right? You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like we mentioned before, there's just a lot of data that needs to be put into the right formats and things like that. So I find it. I think as an observer, right, as an analyst, I'm not involved in the business directly in that sense. It's going to be really interesting to watch how that plays out. All right, now the last thing I want to close out on is thinking more about the enterprise side. Just with your view into what enterprises are purchasing, what their experience is. What do you think that from your view, network managers are kind of thinking about most in the coming year, 2026?
I think network managers in particular, kind of like, business buyers in every vertical, are trying to find ways to embrace automation, and in
Hmm.
particular like AI and data, to basically drive better delivery of whatever they need to deliver within their business. Um,
Right.
I think every single business buyer across every sort of sub segment or sub department of an enterprise is thinking about this today, and that's where we're hell bent on delivering the best possible automation and data oriented experience for those customers to drive magical outcomes. Basically, everything that they buy needs to feel like they're buying into the future, at least from what I'm seeing. And the cool end of that is that enterprises are far more willing to embrace software centric change than times past, I think.
Hmm. Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, for sure. Well, that's actually a really interesting way of thinking about it. There's the sort of automate or die is like permeating the entire economy, right? So
Yeah.
it's just, but that also, that network managers, right, are like usually clued into the more general IT world or whatever, and this is like an IT based change where they can see the power, and they're getting demand from their CTOs, I'm sure, about this. So there's the hope that that they can start thinking about how to integrate these tools into network management themselves. There's
Yep.
supposed always the other end of like, what is that? How does that impact the network team? I think from where I sit, I haven't seen too much impact yet, but there's definitely the possibility, even in the coming year, that we start seeing AI adoption across the enterprise really starting to impact how the network managers have to do their job as well. Would you say that as well?
Yeah, I would. I mean, there are a slew of products now that are getting into sort of like the AI enabled or AI powered network engineer. And I'm not
Hmm.
going to say which one is going to be the best one. In some
Yeah,
senses, we're a component of that for
yeah, yeah.
when management, when procurement, when inventory, when billing, and like we use sort of like AI to automate and enable each component of our workflow beginning to end. Like otherwise, it just wouldn't be possible with
Hmm.
pure human effort. Um, and it'll be interesting to see, like, do people have network managers move, I guess, further up the stack, or
Hmm.
just augment headcount in other ways. So to that end, I don't have a strong opinion, but there are some interesting products making their way into market.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Again, going to be interesting times. I think we got through like the MPLS to SD-WAN kind of revolution went relatively slowly. I think this one might be at a much more dizzying pace. We shall see. Yeah. So
Yep, yep.
yeah. All right. So Dennis, thanks so much for joining us. The report that we've been talking about, the Enterprise ISP Experience Guide. Where can listeners find that if they want to take a deeper look?
Yeah, so check us out at lightyear.ai, and at the top you can go to resources and then ebooks, and then you'll find the Enterprise ISP Experience Guide. It has a ton more detail on everything I chatted through here.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I found it a fascinating read, and it's things that I kind of like are similar, not totally, but similar to what I'm thinking about. So I definitely encourage everyone to take a look.
Awesome.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me, Dennis. It's a pleasure as always.
Likewise. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah. All right. Cheers.